Hey folks, welcome back. Welcome to the Destruction Warlock guide. This is going to be primarily focused on the talents and a little bit of the rotational side of things. Going to try and keep this guide brief in comparison to the hour-long demonology video, but this is because for things like gearing, the crafting orders, I am going to kind of blitz through all of that in this guide, and if you want a more expanded version of to why certain crafting pieces are beneficial to us as warlocks, please do go have a look at my demonology guide, because that's where I go properly into depth, and that's partially why the video is over an hour long there. There are timestamps, so feel free to bounce and mix. So with that, let's get into the main video and kind of do this in the live format that you guys seem to have liked so far. So I am positioned in the same place as I was last time with the crafting orders, and this is primarily because this is a way to show you certain items that have or haven't been crafted. Key notes, obviously, we have tier pieces, so you're going to want a 4-set. The 4-set for destruction is consuming soul shards has a chance to grant you Chaos Maelstrom, increasing your critical strike chance by 10% for 10 seconds. That's our 2-set. And our 4-set, our critical strikes deal 208% damage instead of the usual 200. Neither set piece is particularly impressive. It's not groundbreaking, but it will have certain interactions with certain talents and the way you kind of want to play potentially in game your damage, but it does make things like Chaos Bolts really impactful. So key crafting pieces that we're going to look for, there's two types of crafting gear. There's base epics, which you could fully deck out every single slot with 418 if you so wished, or you have what's known as embellished. Now, the easy way to remember this is embellished items are anything with an effect tied to them, whether that be the Tailoring 2-sets in the Azure Weave or Chronocloth. Azure Weave is an int proc for dealing damage, and the Chronocloth is a haste proc stored up over time. Or you have things like the Elemental Lariat, which is a really popular neck piece at the moment, that has a chance to empower your gems that you have socketed to provide you a amount of secondary stat based on that gem. So you have a few options. My personal taste is the Azure Weave Mantle paired with the Azure Weave Slippers, so I get the int proc because in terms of numbers, at 418 at the maximum quality, it's about 390 intellect that I'm getting. To put that into perspective, that is close to an extra 395 item worth of intellect that on average has a 50% combat uptime. Over the course of a Mythic Plus dungeon, I had 90 procs and 94 reapplications of the proc, resulting in a total of 17 minutes and 17 seconds worth of uptime on a gear proc. Personally, it's my preference, but there are arguments for having Lariat and, say, a ring or a weapon or something along those lines where it frees up your gear slightly. Because obviously the problem with having the Tailoring 2-set is you are extremely limited in terms of your gearing choice after that fact. So neck, cloak, rings, trinkets, and bracers are really the only places where you get that little bit of freedom. So moving on to the bulk, actually, before we go on to the bulk of it with the talents and the builds, the trinkets. So we have a few key trinkets to bear in mind. One of them I don't currently have. I've been very unlucky, but that is the Rage Feather from Knockhood's Offensive. It's a really powerful and really strong passive trinket. In terms of other trinkets, you have the Iridius Fragment. Now, the Iridius Fragment is a Mythic 0, so normal Mythic Halls of Infusion trinket, 372, but it claps like a truck. It is a Mastery stat stick, which when we start talking about the talents, we'll explain why Mastery is actually good for Destruction Warlocks in the current stage of the game. But the fact that it's a 3-minute cooldown and grants 2,572 intellect, that's huge. To put that into perspective, in order for us to get another trinket that can provide near to that level of intellect, you're looking at a 418 or a 421 Halls of Valor, Horn of Valor, which means you need to get it out of your chest. So you need to go from basically base Mythic 0 to what is essentially a 20 key timed in your chest in terms of how strong the Iridius Fragment is. So if you don't have this trinket already, go do your Mythic 0, go do your Halls of Valor, not Halls of Valor, yeah, Halls of Infusion, sorry, and get the Iridius Fragment, because it also fits really well into Demonology, but I do talk about it more there. You also have the Alacritus Alchemist Stone, which as a passive is quite nice. It's a haste passive trinket, but your spells and abilities have a chance to grant you 1,000 intellect for 10 seconds. Same with the sustaining one. Whether you want the Alacritus or the sustaining Alchemist Stone is up to you, whether you want more versatility or you want haste. 6 and 2 3s. And then you've got things like the Whispering Incarnate Icon, which is a intellect stat stick, but depending on how many people in your group have it, can provide you with a large amount of secondary stats. Has more value when more people have it. So if you're like running a more caster focused or a group based content, it's primarily better in raids, because you've got more people that run it, you've got more chance of ensuring that you get all proc types, because it's 445 of crit if you're damaging, and then the other two stats are versatility or haste. And if you have someone in the group that has either of those, you have a chance to proc 241 of that stat for free just by playing around. So it's quite nice, and it means that when you have a tank, a healer, and a DPS that have them in the group, you then have a huge amount of secondary stat budget on a trinket. On its own though, it's not too shabby, but could be a lot better. Because as you can see, having the normal version at 395, it gives 445 crit in relation to either 555 haste or 420 mastery that I currently have, showing above 418 trinket and a 372 trinket. So you can see that that's kind of where the stat budget is. It's somewhere in the middle, more on the low end, but the more allies you have that have the Whispering Incarnate Icon, the more value you will get from it. So we've kind of covered the bulk of the gearing that I want to in this video. Again, if you have any further questions, please do go have a look at the Demonology video, where I talk a lot more in depth. So let's take a drink. Let's take a second, and then we'll talk about the talents, because this is a long one, and I'm trying to get this done as quickly as I can. So, reset. Let's go. We have class talents, and then we also have spec talents. The class talents I have talked to death about in a lot of videos. So, to summarize, for damage-focused abilities, what you care for is Demonic Inspiration, Wrathful Minion, Soul Conduit, and Gromor of Synergy. These are the ones you want to get. So you have this small little rectangle here. These are your mandatory ones. For additional little bits of damage, Inquisitor's Gaze versus Summon Soulkeeper, that's nice enough, but again, it's not huge. There is going to be a change to Inquisitor's Gaze in the next kind of content patch, or the patch cycle that we get, because they don't like the fact that Inquisitor's Gaze is a bit like Arcane Familiar for mages, and then it's basically just a fire and forget button. We just apply it as a buff, get a buff for 60 minutes, and that's it. And it does negligible damage. Like if we look at the total damage, where is it? No, keep scrolling. One of the problems of doing a key where you change spec mid-key is trying to find the, might be Felbolt? Maybe. Point is, it doesn't do a lot of damage, really. It's just a little bit extra going on top of everything else that we do. But those are our four primary talents. Everything else is either utility focused or looking at increasing our survivability, like Demon Skin, Fell Armor, Demonic Embrace, Demonic Fortitude. Things like that, they go to increase our health. And then you've got the likes of Dark Pact that utilize sacrificing that health for a Absorb Shield. So, class talents are now out of the way, and we're doing pretty good time. We've got gear, class talents, and we're only 10 minutes in. Which means that we can focus on the spec talent tree itself, the veins, the thinking about it, and then maybe touch on the rotation a little bit, just to give you guys an idea of how things play and kind of what you can compare. So, we're currently in my AoE Mythic Plus fuck around to find out build, but we will start on the single target kind of raid element focus of things. And what we'll also do is we will actually fly over to the rotational vendor, or the rotational vendors, the target dummies, and we will take a hot minute and do this kind of in lieu. I think mainly so that we can talk about things, take a second, breathe, reset, do the practice, and then crack on and still try and keep this relatively quick for you guys. Hopefully you guys are liking it. If you are, hit a comment, let me know. But anyway, so for single target, you can already see that there's quite a big deviance. You have the left, well, you basically, if you see the talent tree as 4 quadrants, you've got upper left, lower right, upper right, lower left. And you can kind of see straight away that upper right and lower left are just ignored. We pick our Infernal up, but we don't bother with anything like Reign of Chaos, Grand Warlock's Design, or talents that previously made us strong. And partially the reason for this is due to the fact they're undertuned. Another reason is the fact that we just don't physically have the stat budget, essentially, to enable us to make full use of it. We're not really the PI targets anymore, we don't have the Bloodlust, we don't have the haste, and we're not pumping shards out to the point where we can make Reign of Chaos viable at the moment. Because we have to actively decide between something like Reign of Chaos and or Blasphemy Infernal. Because unfortunately, this bottom one, Chaos Incarnate, is kind of a mandatory pick at the moment. But we'll discuss why. So, this is my raid build, and this is because I have the Force set. Now, the Force set and the way it works is you're essentially creating a feedback loop with your crits and maximizing your crit damage. Conflagration of Chaos basically causes your Conflagrates and Shadowburns to have a feedback loop with themselves. This means that you can have Conflagrates that are going to crit for like 66 to 80k comfortably, which means that there are certain fights where if you're Shadowburning low targets, Shadowburn can infinitely cycle to do damage to pick off low-end targets. So, a good boss example for this, if we go to raids, would be Senath, the Cold Breath. Because what she does is spawns all these caustic skitterlings, or spiderlings. And these things need to die. So, with a little bit of AoE and tanking positions, depending on where your tanks put them, you can then, once these get to about 25% health, you can start picking these off quite rapidly with Shadowburn charges. Maybe it's not supposed to be your job, but maybe they just need to die. But you also have Havoc as well, which you need to remember. So if you Havoc the boss, and then go about dealing with the spiderlings, you're in a good spot. So, that's why my raid set looks the way it does. However, there is another variant of this build. Well, there's a couple of variants, truth be told. What you need to bear in mind is pretty much from Flashpoint downwards. Flashpoint, Eradication, Ashen Remains, Madness of the Azure, Chaos Incarnate. These are all basically your mandatory picks. So, what we do is we come down, we select Roaring Blaze, Explosive Potential, and then we've got 3 points to spend that we can spend anywhere, and we're kind of going to discuss what our options are. So you have Channel Demon Fire. This is a fire-focused build that emphasizes Roaring Blaze. You then have 2 choices. We've got 2 points that we need to spend, and we've got a place where we can put them. Generally speaking, you're going to look at either picking Reverse Entropy or Internal Combustion. Now, generally speaking, depending on where you're at in terms of your gearing, you're going to favor one of these 2. Mathematically, Internal Combustion is arguably better, because your Chaos Bolts consume 5 seconds of Immolate's damage to increase the damage, because basically you're proccing 5 seconds of Immolate damage every Chaos Bolt. This does mean that you have to refresh Immolate often, almost every third cast of Chaos Bolt has to be an Immolate, Or you can play Reverse Entropy. Now, Reverse Entropy is just a haste proc. Your spells and abilities have a chance to grant you 15% haste, which is a nice quality of life proc more than anything else. But it's not additional damage in the conventional sense. And this then leaves us one talent that we have to use. We either have to go Havoc or we have to go Rain of Fire, depending on where you want to put your gear and how you want to do things. From a pure raiding perspective, with no outgoing like AoE that you can decide for, you can pick Havoc, because from a raid setting, most of the raid bosses in the current raid have ad they spawn. They don't have egregious amounts of AoE, but they have elements where you can Havoc something. The only fight that's an exception to this, really, is Teros. Everything else spawns at least ad, or has elements of ads within the fight where you can make use of Havoc. The only fight potentially where you may look to Rain of Fire instead would be the likes of maybe Broodkeeper and or Razagath at the end, purely because of the first intermission when you're going around the little platforms dealing with the packs of ads. There you can Rain of Fire rather than Havoc. But it's entirely up to you. We're going to focus more on a single target focused-esque raid build, and we'll discuss the Rain of Fire stuff in an AoE build. So, this is our set. We then go into the next bit. You already saw my Ruin configuration of Chaos build, so we're not going to touch that. What we're actually going to focus instead is the Soulfire build. This is a build that I play, or played pre-4set, and in terms of actual numerical value, there's not much difference between them. Soulfire hits like a motherfucking truck. It hits really hard, to the point where it's almost comparable to Chaos Bolts. And once you get below 50% health, you're going to be able to progressively cast more Soulfires. And that is due to Decimation. Your Incinerate and Conflagrate casts on the target have a 50% chance, or have a put my teeth back in. Your Incinerate and Conflagrate casts on targets that have 50% or less health reduce the cooldown of Soulfire by 5 seconds. This is huge, because this eventually gets to the point where your Soulfire goes from being a 45-second cooldown to close to a 20-second cooldown, and is hitting hard as the boss goes down. The more haste you have, the more casts you're getting out, the faster this is going to happen anyway. You also have to bear in mind that it's buffed by Roaring Blaze, because it's fire damage. So, with that, we then have 8 points that need to be spent. And remember, I said 2 points in Flashpoint, 2 points in Eradication, and 2 points in Ashen Remains are mandatory. Which means that your next placement for this fire build is also mandatory. Raging Demon Fire. Now, what this does is this turns your Channel Demon Fire into a Immolate Extending monster, which is why you can, in theory, play Internal Combustion. Because again, Internal Combustion with Roaring Blaze means that you're going to be getting value from this. The only problem is, you're relying on your Soulfire and your Channel Demon Fire to generate your Immolate, and extend them to keep them rolling to kind of try and make the playstyle a little bit more beneficial. You then have 2 points in Flashpoint. This is an old ability come back to us. So Immolate deals when your Immolate deals periodic damage to a target above 80% health, gain 4% haste for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. This is just a nice passive thing at the start of a fight, or if ads are spawning and these ads are going to live for a while. And then have Eradication. This is just a Chaos Bolt increases the damage you deal to the target by 10% for 7 seconds. It's just a nice to have. And then Ashen Remains, Chaos Bolt and Incinerate deal 10% more damage to targets afflicted by Immolate. Which, coincidentally enough, if you're running Internal Combustion, is going to be the case anyway, because you want Immolate on the target to begin with. Now we're at the final bit. We are at the bottom tiers. And this is where things again kind of become a little bit more mandatory. Due to how we are geared at the moment, and what our total stat budget across all our secondary stats is, we basically have to make up for Chaos Incarnate. Madness of the Azure used to be legendary. They changed it so that it now affects Rain of Fire and Shadowburn respectively, and causes those abilities to have feedback loops. So for Chaos Bolt, and for single target, Chaos Bolt increases the damage of Chaos Bolt by 25% and reduces the cast time of Chaos Bolt by 20% for 4 seconds. Basically, every other Chaos Bolt cast is going to be buffed. Your first one applies your buff, your second one is buffed, and then you try and get into this point where you try and get as many Chaos Bolts as you can into a period while you have Madness of the Azure Gear up. So every second or every third spell, you're trying to make sure it's a Chaos Bolt, an empowered Chaos Bolt, if you can. Obviously, we're in a position where that's a little bit difficult, but there will be elements of times where you can get that third or even a fourth Chaos Bolt cast in while making use of the original buff you put up. Because each subsequent Chaos Bolt cast will refresh the buff. Madness of the Azure Gear also plays really powerful into AoE side of things because it now affects Rain and Fire. The big powerhouse of this, though, is the fact Chaos Incarnate is a passive talent, but it means that Chaos Bolt, Rain of Fire, Shadow Burn always benefit from the maximum benefit of your Mastery Chaotic Energies. Now, for those of you that don't know, our Mastery is a little bit RNG. I say a little bit, it's a huge amount of RNG. Your spells and abilities, I have 55% Mastery currently. I could game that a little bit more and try and put more Mastery on, but 55% Mastery means 27.5% increased damage. Your spells just deal that, plus a random amount of up to an additional 27.5% additional damage. Which means that we can do up to 55% more damage. Our spells will do 27.5, then plus a random amount up to that. So on average, you're probably going to be looking at about a 30% damage increase. And that's on the low end. But then, with Chaos Incarnate, your Chaos Bolts, your Rain of Fires, and your Shadow Burns are now just hitting your full Mastery benefit. So you are doing a maximum amount of 55% damage on Chaos Bolts or Rain of Fires. Not taking into account the fact that when they crit, they're getting your set bonus, or the fact that Chaos Bolt's damage is further increased by your critical strike chance. So Chaos Bolt does a base amount of, in my case on the tooltip, it's 30k chaos damage. Damage is further increased by your critical strike chance, in my case 24, 34 if I get my set proc. And then on top of that, because I have Chaos Incarnate, it's doing 55% additional damage on top of that. So to put it into perspective, just a simple Chaos Bolt, rather than being 30k, low end, 60k. It's just doubled itself in damage. And that's just play, like, that's just to give you an idea on the tooltip and kind of how these talents feed into each other. So we now have 6 points, and the next question is, okay, where do we put these 6 points? Well, we're going to want Infernal. It's a 3-minute cooldown, but it's still a cooldown. We want that. We then want to make sure that we have our Avatar of Destruction. Now, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either go through Master Ritualist, because they basically changed the way Ritual of Ruin works. So that it's 15 soul shards spent grants you a Ritual of Ruin, causing your next Chaos Bolt or Rain of Fire to consume no shards and have its cast time reduced by 50%. Now, with Master Ritualist, you can drop it back down to that required 10 shards that it was in Shadowlands, because obviously Blasphemy Infernal used to be our set bonus there. And then we can pick up Avatar of Destruction. Now, this leaves you 2 points to put where you like. Generally speaking, a lot of the times you're going to pick up 1 point in Diabolic Embers because you want your Incinerates to have that additional 100% shard fragment generation. So you basically want it to be double as Incinerate, to be twice as effective to generate you your soul shards, which then leaves you 1 point. Now, a really common thing is to put it into Power Overwhelming, and this is because consuming soul shards increases your mastery by 0.5 for 10 seconds for each shard spent. So this is a % for every Chaos Bolt. Gaining stacks do not refresh the duration, so you'll basically just have this cycle of mastery generation, but you will constantly be having at least 1% mastery gain on top of what you already have, which for the case of things like Chaos Bolt is just a 1% increase to your damage with Chaos Incarnate. So that's why this talent is kind of popular. Alternatively, what you can do is you can do this. And this variant's quite popular because what this does is, again, because you're working on a fire build, you have Burn to Ashes. So Chaos Bolt and Rain of Fire increase the damage of your next incinerates by 30%, stacking up to 4 times. And you've reduced Materialist list from the 15 to the 12 shards and still getting your Avatar of Destruction. So we'll save the build, we'll play it like this, and I will talk you or show you what the damage might be like going forward. Then we'll do the AoE, and then I will wrap this video up. So we are coming towards the end and we won't be too much longer. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to make sure our pet's on assist. Actually, we will summon Imp, treat it like it's an actual raid fight. We will start off with a Soul Flame, Conflagurate, Channel Demon Fire, drop an Infernal, Chaos Bolt, Chaos Bolt, Chaos Bolt a second time, refresh, Incinerate, or Immolate, sorry. We're going to want to refresh, Channel Demon Fire, Chaos Bolt, Chaos Bolt, Chaos Bolt. And you can kind of see that the damage is there. The only problem is from this particular kind of playstyle is you have to make sure that you're juggling your immolates correctly. Because you don't want that to expire, and you want to make sure that you've kind of got this damage consistently playing through. We'll hit that Soulfire as well. 75k for a Soulfire. And our Chaos Bolts are doing 66k. So Soulfire will actually hit harder thanks to Roaring Blaze. And during a raid setting, it's quite large. Now, if we just... While we were there, we had 3 procs of the Zero Revestment and 8 reapplications of it, which was quite nice. So we managed to get a 59% uptime during the combat for that fight, which ain't too shabby. Now, Brook's all coming back. Oh, there's another Destruction Warlock around the corner. Makes sense. That explains why things are happening. Right, okay. So, the Ruin build variant kind of comes down and allows for more Havoc settings. So if we come back out, do that. The configuration of Chaos build looks more like this. And this is because we're not using Roaring Blaze as much. So you could, if you really wanted to, potentially take this point out and go for improved Conflagurate. Look like this, so you actually have a 3rd Conflagurate charge. So we go from 2 charges to 3 on a 9-second rotation. We have the Conflagration of Chaos, and then we go into it like this. We'll give it 20 seconds, and then we'll do this as a comparison. So we're looking at about 50k. Bearing in mind I don't have flasks, I don't have food buffs, I don't have bloodlust, and I'm obviously playing this a little bit slower as I talk, but you can kind of see that we're looking at about 55k-ish on the burst, and you can probably comfortably sustain it at around that mark as well. So, this time, we don't have anything like Soulfire to set up and precast, but we will try and do this in a raiding setting anyway. So, because we're not going to be in any execute stage, Shadowburn is off to the side and I won't be pressing it, but let's get into it. So, we've got that. Incinerate, refresh the Immolate, going for a Chaos Bolt. want to keep our conflagrations of chaos rolling if we can. And with having 3 charges, it means that we're always rotating one of these conflagration charges, and you can see that the damage is actually kind of there, and you'd be surprised just how much of it's coming through conflag, because our conflags are now hitting for 55k. Which, when you consider that you're comparing that to Chaos Bolts, this is now an instant cast method of damage. I think that was just an 80k conflag that we just had there. Yeah, we just had an 80k conflagration crit. Now, this particular build, I suspect, is going to be less about PvE and more focused on a almost AoE build. Once we drop combat, I'll pull up the talents again. Because this enables for a more instant cast style of PvP. You'd be able to alternate to Dimensional Rift and maybe play around with a couple of extra talents to get like Channel Demon Fire or something to give you those options. But this is a more mobile spec at the cost of a little bit of damage. Not a huge amount, but as you can see, those conflagrates are starting to come in handy for those larger crits. Because the other thing with Conflagration of Chaos is it causes the ability to critically... Conflagrate and Shadowburn have a 50% chance to critically to guarantee your next cast of the ability to critically strike and increase its damage by your crit strike amount. So, as I said, I have about 24% crit, which means that when I get Conflagration of Chaos, my Conflagrates are having a 24% increase to their damage, not including any Chaos Maelstrom procs that I have through my set bonus. Because if that's the case, then they're 34% damage increases, which is quite nice. And you can kind of game that with Roaring Blaze if you want, or you can have the extra charge of Conflagrate. So, we've discussed the kind of raiding side of things, just past the half an hour mark. Let's see if we can't wrap this up strong, relatively quickly, and get the AoE side of things out of the way. So, we're going to swap to the AoE school of uck around and find out. And we're going to play around with this. We're just going to move that Rain of Fire here, because I have a macro set so that Rain of Fire lands on my cursor. My Infernal does the same, but I do this for speed, back when the Inferno school, as it were, was a considerably faster build. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this in terms of selecting the talents themselves. I'm just going to show you this build, and then I'm going to show you an alternative build. But this one is very much focused on making sure that you'll get your Infernals out. It's the larger pack pulls if you can help it, but you do have Fire and Brimstone to help solidify damage in places. We've got 1 point in Burn to Ashes, although again you can swap these two over if you wish. So rather than going 2-2-1 in this right hand corner, you've got 2-1-2. It depends on how much of your damage you actually want to be or incinerate. So with that in place, let's get these fenders up, get that on, and get this rolling. So refresh, and yeah, just to show that's 390 on the Azir Weave. So we're going to get this down. And just get the ball rolling. We end up in a position with this particular build where you end up with so many shards, you could afford to not be running Burn to Ashes, because as you can see, I'm not actually getting to spend it all, and we're only on a 5 target count. So you could go with Power Overwhelming, because when you consider that you're also trying to get these Immolates out on targets, and putting it out, you've got your Blasphemy Infernals rolling in, you end up in this position where really does kind of sustain itself. Like, Algathar Academy is a really good example of this, but so is the first stages of Not Good Offensive, the second and middle areas of Temple of the Jade Serpent, Ruby Life Pools as well. You're kind of looking at this target count where you can just kind of passively roll your damage through. It's not going to be huge, and one of the drawbacks of this build is the fact that obviously you need your tank to stay still, because obviously a Rain of Fire out over here is no good to heaven or hell. What you need is you need it here on the target, which means you need a Death Ball style of tank. But I'll kind of be discussing that in its own video once the Affliction Guide's out and we can actually compare the specs properly, and I can do a side-by-side comparison. So, with that, we have one step left, and then we are good to go. So we just got to wait a minute, swap the spec around slightly, and be good to go. So, the next step is actually coming out of Fire and Brimstone, dropping down into this. We've then got and having a build like this. Now, this build may not look all that impressive, but it's a build that we have utilized in the past for more bursty AoE. We have Cataclysm, we have Channel Demon Fire, we have Rain of Fire, we have Havocs to help us quickly generate shards paired with Pandemonium, we have Master Ritualist and our Avatar of Destruction, Chaos Incarnate, and we also have Power Overwhelming for a little bit of additional help in terms of mastery damage. So how this spec would work is you'd go in with a Rain of Fire, you drop your Cataclysm, immediately channel Demon Fire, throw in a Havoc, and you'd focus on generating your shards and then using your shards for Rain of Fires as normal, free and channel Demon Fires to help increase, because you can see that by increasing it with channel Demon Fire, especially for these sustained packs, you don't actually have to reapply Immolate because Cataclysm comes back off cooldown just in time, and we end up with this lower AoE amount. Like, it's not spiraling as much. We haven't dropped our Infernal yet, so we'll do that, but this is a Devil May Care kind of attitude in terms of damage, and it's much more sustained, it's more manageable. It allows us to maintain ourselves more comfortably without having to worry about certain elements in terms of how our damage is coming in. Is the tank staying put? Is he doing the right thing? And there will come a point where you eventually have to manually apply your immolates, but generally you end up in a position where you can kind of look after yourself. There will be a few elements, but that's what Havoc comes in for and is quite helpful. So you can see that we're just slowly climbing. Our damage is increasing as we go through this. It's nothing huge, nothing fancy. We didn't end up with anything crazy, but we've slowly climbed total DPS, and we're just not letting anything drop off. Now, this does have a point where it will stop, but being able to have a mix of bursty AoE rather than ramping AoE, paired with some good single target and just a general strong foundation, essentially, for damage, puts Destruction in a really comfortable place to be. At least in my opinion. So with that, hopefully you guys have liked this video. Hopefully it's helped, and you guys will let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've liked the video, hit it up with a subscribe. If you haven't, let me know why, and I'll try and improve on the next one. In the meantime though, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care folks, and have a good one.